Hello. So in this episode, I'll be talking to Colette Safhill of Myth Drinks. In the first part of it, she does talk about her early life, which features stories of neglect and abuse and violence and addiction. So if they're things that you might struggle to listen to, then maybe skip ahead to the tea break, which is about an hour in, after which she'll be talking about the rise of her business and more cheerful things. But I would encourage you to watch the whole thing because it is a really inspiring story.
And we just wanted a way to offer what we know as the women we are rather than the roles in a way that was accessible, affordable, understandable, relatable. We're still trying to mapping out what that looks like. And Andy sort of built his business, but went back to sort of running his business again and all of that. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have one more go at this. How hard can it be? And what was interesting is in those intervening years, the sector had grown. But it was about the taste. It's about writing your own story, making your own choices, actually connectivity, memories, all those things that alcohol promises and just doesn't deliver. Just that. But with a smile, you know?
Hello again. Welcome to another edition of Northern Spotlights with me, Terry McStay. It's great to see you. I'm glad you could join us. And today I'm delighted to be introducing Colette from Myth Drinks.
Hi, I'm Colette from Myth Drinks, and I also have Goat Drinks. I live up in the north of Yorkshire, and I'm quite new to the sector. And thank you, Terry, for inviting me.
My pleasure. Now you say Myth Drinks and Goat Drinks, but you actually do quite a few other things, don't you? And I don't know where you get the energy from. So what's your other sort of interest or?
What do I do? So by trade, I work in therapy. I work in counselling and psychotherapy. And I tend to, as I've got older, I started off being interested in specifically in alcohol use and misuse. As I've gotten older, I'm interested in kind of gendered pathologizing of experience. So how women tend to feel broken, there's something wrong with them. Whereas with men, we tend to look at environment and really how we can find a place to take ourselves through the different stages of our lives. So I run a clinic. I've just gone back to uni because I'm working towards my doctorate at the moment. I don't know if I told you that or not, but might have been a step too far, might not be the right time, but I guess I wanted to make a start on that. I also work with two other women, sometimes the doctor, the therapist and the coach, and we've just written a book, just about to launch, and we have a podcast series.
I was going to say you do a podcast also, don't you?
Yeah, we do. So Angela Dr. Wright is a GP, a clinical sexologist and hormone expert, not for polite company, but an absolute laugh. And
well, I would say that this is our audience are very broad-minded and interested, so we can cover all of those.
Okay, and then Gemma, who's the coach, Gemma Taylor Magnuson, or Gemma Taylor as she is now. She is a former World's Strongest Woman and UK Strongest Woman, and she's just gone back into competition actually in the summer. And between us, we look at that kind of intersection between your sort of emotions, your body, your medical history. We're the three of us are best friends, and we were just talking one day about how we tend to see people come in with the same question, and then how do we approach that differently? We don't always agree. So Jem will say, no, you need more exercise, and Angela will say, no, you need hormones. And I'm like, hang on, let's just reassess where we're starting from here. Let's, meet people where they're at. And we just wanted a way to offer what we know as the women we are rather than the roles, in a way that was accessible, affordable, understandable, relatable. We're still trying to mapping out what that looks like. So we started with the book. We're doing an audience where there's a book launch, people just to come and meet us and talk to us and find out who we are. We're also, all three of us are neurodiverse, which is probably why we're close friends. I think we're going to go on to do kind of conversations with and maybe retreats, maybe an online offering, but it is about it being accessible and being usable. So yeah, so there's sort of the three things I do with therapy. I also work as a mental health first aid trainer, so I kind of train the trainers, and that's actually what I was doing yesterday. And that's one of the things I do that quite scares me. I find it quite difficult. I get in a bit of a flap with the tech and the laptop and the slides and the clicker and the handouts, and I really struggle with that. I can stand and just talk, but I really kind of struggle with the frickery of it, you know. I'm still a bit traumatized from yesterday, actually. So they're probably the things I do across my work environment, and then obviously I have the drinks as well.
Because this is the first time we've actually met face to face, isn't it? We've had lots of conversations on Zoom and Teams and things. And whenever we have a meeting or a chat, some of the things you tell me are like, you've done what? You've been where? Really? But you just seem to, oh yeah, I've done this, I've done that. And I come away thinking, crikey, how does she find the time or the energy, or how does she make these things happen? So we're going to explore all of that over the next however long we've got. But first, so as with all our guests, you've sent me or asked you for a couple of photographs, just so we can get a feel for, you know, who you are and where you come from and what brought you to this place. So there's this is one of you at a young age. What age would you say you were there, do you think?
To be honest, I don't know. So I would guess, looking at it, maybe 2, 3, something like that. I really struggled to find any pictures. I had one of those childhoods that sound very sad when you talk about it, particularly as an adult. When you talk back, and as I am a mother myself, I wouldn't have wanted that for my children. But there aren't very many photos. So there was there's a set of these, and then there was a couple when I was a baby, and a couple that were taken maybe a year or so later, but that's all I could find.
Well, I'm glad you were able to dig that one out for us. So
cute, isn't it?
You look extraordinarily happy there.
I think I probably was, looking back at it, yeah.
And so you grew up in the south of England, is that right?
Partly. So I was one of the original kind of tug of love children.
Okay.
I don't know. It's interesting. I mean, in psychology, you'd say we have like narrative selves. So we are the accumulation of our stories, our own stories, and what people tell us. And I didn't really have that, and I don't have that. A bit like the photographs, I don't really have things to refer to. And there was this real division between my parents, their families, and in my life geographically and in a familial sense. And there wasn't really anyone to speak to. So what I do know is my mother married my father. My mother was from Barnsley, South Yorkshire. And my father, interestingly, was from up here as well. But I didn't know that because I only knew he was in the south. He was born in the Friarage, which is in Northallerton, which is really close to where I live. But I wasn't aware of that. So at the time he was living near Chelmsford in Essex. And they got married. They had a house there. I don't really know what happened other than both my parents were challenging people. My mother had a drink problem. And my father had a personality problem. And they were just the wrong people to be together. Anyway, so I know that she got pregnant with me and had me. And then I know there ensued these years where she would take me to Barnsley to her family, and my father would come up and get me and take me back down south, and she'd come and get me in the middle of the night. And it was kind of like that. But I genuinely...
I was going to say, you're almost describing that as though it happened to someone else, or it's a story that you heard as opposed to...
Yeah, it did. I mean, I can remember, her name's Catherine, my mother. My father's name's Will. I can remember Catherine coming once. I was at Danbury Park Primary School, and it's amazing what you remember, in Mr. Backler's class, actually. And I can remember seeing her walk past the window of the classroom and coming in to get me and leaving with her, and knowing I wasn't allowed to. So what I do know as a fact is my father went to the High Court, and I can remember it when I was very, very young, and got full custody, full care and control of me, which back in those days must have been really unusual. And I think it's indicative of the position my mother's drinking had put her into. Her family are kind of Irish mining family, and you know,
hard drinking.
And we can sing, and we can fight, but mostly drink. And I think now that I'm much older, looking back, I think my father did what he thought was right. And I think given his quite limited ability to do that, and the fact that he was a loner, he probably did quite a good job of it. So the pictures like the one that's there, I believe, were when I was in his care.
Because you told me some things about your father. He was a really interesting guy, wasn't he? He did some amazing things.
Yeah, he was really clever. I just think it's really sad that because individually they're my parents, so in role it was my father and my mother, but for neither of them that was their skill set. So it's kind of, I got to judge them on the thing they were least able to do almost. But as a person, he was a mathematician and a physicist. He was incredibly intelligent. He died a few years ago, and when I was clearing out his house, there were all these exercise books from when he was very, very young with really complicated equations. And I mean, he was clearly really clever. But as a person, he was very much ahead of his time. He believed in organic food, wild food, fresh air, exercise, things that we kind of take for granted now. But as a young child, growing up with that, the town weirdo. And all I really wanted was clean socks and the burger from the Wimpy like my friends had. I didn't really want hand-shot rabbit. And but I do have some good memories. He took me brambling and used to take me kind of clearing the old railway track, and got me lost on every walking track there is in England, I think. Took me horse riding and really gave me that foundation of what I still believe today of, you are in control of your own health. You are in control of your own destiny. But he believed very much in kind of the seasons and the power of nature, and things are what they are and you should sort of let them go. But he was a hoarder, so I've had a lifelong fear of stuff. And he was a very challenging person. Like I say, I don't think that parenting was his primary gift.
Strong point. Yeah.
Not really, no. As he died a few years ago, so I think in respect of that, I won't offer too many situational examples. But it was fair to say that I spent most of my childhood with him, cold and scared and doing things I was ill-equipped for. And I just really wanted to go and live with my mother, and that wasn't his fault.
But it also sounds as though some of those things that you experienced have become part of who you are.
Oh, very much so. Yeah, very much so.
And I think we often don't appreciate that until we're older, do we? And think, you know what? I didn't understand at the time, but actually I'm glad I had those experiences, because it's,
I very seldom feel that I have no options. I very seldom feel. He used to say things to me like, he always just call me Letty. He'd say, Letty, when someone tells you what's possible, they're telling you what they're capable of, not you. Always ask forgiveness, not permission. He used to say that as well.
And I think knowing you as I do, that is how you do things, isn't it?
Very much so.
You just do things.
And I'm not worried about getting it wrong, because Will taught me that isn't a construct. Wrong isn't a construct. Everything is iterative. It's a learning process. There's not a polarity. Yeah, he was hyper intelligent, and he really instilled those virtues of academia and intelligence and knowing your stuff. Go find out. Don't find out what someone else knows. Find out what you know. Find out what's interesting to you, and then know that and stand by it. But be polite, be appropriate. But I remember when I was in my 20s, I took up smoking, and my father was not pleased. He was much more angry that I'd taken up smoking than that I got married to someone who was completely inappropriate at 18.
So it sounds like you did instill in you some really good beliefs and
approaches
to life.
He did.
Yeah,
a few more clean clothes and sensible dinners would have helped. A
bit
more heating in the house.
Without those things.
I remember him taking the front door off because fresh air was supposed to be good for you, and I just things like that. Yeah, it was It makes a good story now, but difficult to live at the time.
So you lived with him through your early years, your teens?
Yes and no. So again, it's quite hazy, and I don't really have anywhere to definitely go with that. I know when we lived in Danbury near Chelmsford, we had another family come to live with us. I think that was to look after me. It was a big old house, and they moved in, I think, predominantly to look after me. We then left there and moved to Halstead in Essex because my father took a job there. And I was primary school. I can remember the school. It was St Andrew's School, so I can remember that. And I'd started seeing my mother a bit more. And I can remember like crossing the days off on the calendar until I could see her. And I can remember my father taking me up to Barnsley to see her, or they'd swap me on the A1 at Kate's Cabin Cafe. I can remember that. And I can remember crying and howling when I had to leave. And it just broke my heart. And when I got to about 9, I think, maybe 10, I just made the decision that I was going to live with her. And that was what was going to happen. And I didn't really care what anybody else said. And I can remember the social worker involved, and I can remember what I was wearing. And I can remember my father being heartbroken, not from ego, but from fear. And then I moved to Barnsley, just at the time of the miners' strike. And we lived in Worsborough, next village to Arthur Scargill. And I had the wrong accent. And I went to a rough school. And I didn't know, although my mother obviously had a lot of brothers and sisters, the Irish Catholic thing, I wasn't part of that family. I'd always been the outsider. And there wasn't really ballet, and there wasn't brownies. There were pubs and people drinking and smoking and working men's clubs and things that I just wasn't equipped for. And I knew pretty much from the beginning I'd made an awful mistake, even being that young, just an awful mistake. And I knew there probably wasn't any way back from it as well. And that was really formative for me. My mother was in a relationship, as most women with an alcohol dependency problem, well, not most, but it can be a pattern for women with alcohol dependency, that the relationships they engage in are not healthy, they're not helpful, and there was domestic violence. I have some truly awful memories of that time. It's kind of context of society and community as well. Shops were closing down. There was violence on the streets. I can remember miners coming in to take the 4th and 5th year boys out of school to get them to stand on the picket lines. Families were divided. None of this was what I was used to. I wasn't used to that socio-demographic. I didn't have the right accent. I know that doesn't sound like a big thing, but in school, when you need to fit in, sounding like a newsreader from Surrey, didn't help. And I can remember practicing. I wanted to practice to sound northern. And my mother had brothers and sisters, like within streets of each other, and my nana and my granddad. But it was a life I didn't understand. Going to the offie to get granddad's whiskey in the middle of the night. I'd been eating organic rabbit, 3 weeks before, and my father had been teaching me Milton's Paradise Lost, and now I was in a different environment that I didn't understand. It was very alien, and I didn't have an anchor. So she got rid of the particularly aggressive guy. There were lots of police in and out, lots of domestic violence units, it must have broke my father's heart. Even, people smoking next to me and all the things he'd really fought against for me. And there were a few situations with him. I'd been up and down to see him, but he didn't respond well to me leaving. And that wasn't really an open door after that. Then we moved into the strike, and my mother's drinking got worse. She had stopped for a while and gone to AA, and then she met someone else. And the thing that's true with alcoholic women for some men is they're very easily controllable. And this particular person kind of reintroduced her to drink. She went through a spate, and I genuinely don't know how long it was. I'm going to say about 6 months, where she just kept taking overdoses. And it felt like every other weekend she was being carted out of the house and her stomach was pumped. And what did happen during this time, and I felt it very strongly, was that I was blamed. So I was 12, and I was blamed for being the cause of this. So it was my fault. I was selfish. I was thoughtless. It was my fault. And I can remember one night in Barnsley General, and so I used to play the keyboards. That was my thing. Okay, and I really wanted my mother's approval. Well, she bought me a little Bontempi keyboard for Christmas when I was about 10 or 11, and I really wanted her good approval. So I just learned, and I was really good, and I passed all the exams. She never listened, but that's what I did. And I remember this particular night because I had a keyboard exam the next day. And the fire brigade or the police or someone had come in, and they got me out of bed and they carried her down the stairs and they put her in an ambulance and taken us both to hospital. And I was sitting in this corridor in Barnsley General, middle of the night, while they were pumping charcoal into her. And this was the woman I thought was the most beautiful, amazing woman in the world. Yeah. And the nurse took pity on me and gave me this magazine to read. And it's funny what you remember. I remember sitting in this corridor, just on like one of those hospital chairs. There was nobody else there. And then the next morning, there was a phone call from my nanan, and my father took it, didn't say anything to me, just took the call. And maybe 10 minutes later, there was a knock on the door, and this policeman came in. I can remember him, he had a really big beard. And he just said to me, or said to my father actually with me standing there, have you told her? Turned to me and said, your mother's dead. And kind of in that moment, I knew that whatever came next wasn't going to be in my favour. There was going to be kind of nowhere to go. And so my father took me back up north, insisted that I stayed in my mother's house that night, the house she died in, because it would be good for me. And I believe he thought that. He then went back down south again, and my mother had 4 sisters and a brother, and I had a nana and a granddad. And they decided that the next day, having just had this news, having just spent the night in the haunted house, that the very best thing for me to do was to go and stay with a neighbour. Nobody would give me bed space. Nobody let me stay with them that night. And I stayed with this neighbour, next door neighbour to where my mother lived, for the next few days. I went back to school, knowing that I wasn't going to stay in that area. And each of my mother's family, for good reason, I'm sure, I wasn't able to stay with them. So I sent back to my father. And this was kind of before social services were really integrated, I think. And I don't think anybody thought through what that would look like. My father had really moved on with his life. And again, I imagine it was really hard to have me when I was little. And maybe it was time for him to have his own life and hadn't expected me to go back. And I probably wasn't the best version of myself by this point either.
Which is probably understandable.
Fair enough, yeah. And again, I was 12. And I'd made a big fuss when I'd left. You know, I had a huge flourish of I'm going to do what I want to do. And there I am back with a dead mother and a bit of a mental health problem. And he went and took a course in London and just left me in the house on my own, with no real way to pay for myself or social services were involved again. And there was this whole period of time, you know, I had a social aunt and uncle for a bit. I had a bit of staying here, staying there. And all my life I've had this kind of, oh, you stayed with us, you stayed with us, you stayed with us. And it's always been a bit like that. I didn't really have a place that was my own. I had a very difficult time at school, really difficult time at school. I was very badly bullied. And I think I didn't even want to fit in by this point, actually. I didn't really care. Had the wrong accent again because I managed to catch a bit of the north by this point. I put a lot of weight on. It's one of the few times in my life I really gained weight. And the school wasn't as academic as the school that I'd just come out of. So although obviously Barnsley was very difficult during that time, I was in a Catholic school there because my family were Catholic there. And I'd moved into a comprehensive school in the south and it was quite different. And I was just really unhappy, really, really unhappy. I still functioned. I had a band that I played in and I had a little part-time job that I did and I had some friends, but I was living in quite a fantasy world by that point, this kind of slightly splintered alt where it was a bit different for me and I had no parental input at all. So, and that took me up to about 16.
Growing up, so 16, you've had all of those experiences. What kept you going? What kept you afloat, do you think?
I think I'm naturally really optimistic. I do have this thing. It's like when I go to sleep at night and wake up, it's like an erased Etch-a-Sketch. I just start again. Oh, there you go. I don't quite know what that is. That's part of it. I've been blessed with some really good friends over the years. I'm naturally inquisitive. I don't expect people to love me. So
it's a bonus when they do.
Yeah, you know, neither of my parents loved me. That's not feel sorry for me. That's not they just didn't. I wasn't abused because they didn't notice me. I was neglected, you know. So I just don't expect it. I've got quite a good moral code. I think that helps. I'm clever. That helps. But I don't carry other people's expectations. And I'm quite resilient.
Yeah, well, clearly.
When I was 16, I think one of the worst things happened. Not the worst thing, but one of the worst things. So I was involved in a road traffic accident. I was hit by a car and I was very badly injured. I was crossing the road near my father's house, and it was one of the girls at school who I didn't get on with, actually. It was her mother. I don't know whose fault it was. I literally don't know. They said I stepped out in front of this. It was like the bus parks here, the road crossing was here. I stepped out and I got hit here. But I got hit by a Sierra, so I was thrown up in the air and I shattered my leg very badly. Still got all the scars and everything now, all these years later. So I've still got all the scars now. I can remember hitting the tarmac. And up until this point, I'd always felt invincible in my body. I used to dance a lot as a child. I really wanted. My youngest daughter dances, actually. And I think I always thought I was going to be a dancer. That's what I wanted to do. And I can remember the ambulance men taking me on the stretcher. I can remember apologising. I can remember my father was there. And then I was taken to hospital. And it wasn't, I mean, there was awful injuries. You know, I had pins and plates and I broke my arms and my legs and all sorts of things. And I was in hospital for quite some time. I had surgery. And when I came out of kind of the emergency hospital, I was then moved to a rehabilitation unit to learn how to function. So I was very badly injured. But there was no one to look after me when I came home. So I'm in this filthy hoarder's house. He's not there. And I couldn't so much as get myself a drink. What was I going to do? I had to kind of crawl to the bathroom because I couldn't stand. I couldn't, because I'd broken my collarbones and my arms. I couldn't use crutches. I couldn't, there was nobody to care for me. There was no way to have a cup and the crutch and move. There was no way to do any of that. And because of that, I didn't go back to school for my A-levels for the first year. I mean, it's absolutely remarkable that I managed to get through school, actually. And I went back kind of towards the end of my first year, but I did my A-levels in 3 years. And when I went back, I still had this huge cast on, and I was still on crutches, and I had like all the metal work and everything in my leg, and it was heavily in the scars, and it was heavily stitched up. And I can remember the other kids at school being really mean. Oh, it was your fault. You traumatized this girl's mother by stepping out in front of a car. You tried to kill yourself. None of this was true. But there was nobody to back me up, and the adults thought that as well. There was nobody to help. There was nobody to carry my school bag. There was no way for me to get to school. I used to walk on crutches from school up hills, you know, and things. There was nobody to do that stuff. And I was being judged on not passing the history essay and not, you know, there was nobody at home to feed me. There was no money. There was nobody at home. I couldn't stand up. And that's when I realised that there just wasn't anybody. Like nobody. And that was probably the worst because I didn't feel safe in myself then. Up until that, I've always been able to run or hide and that changed it. And just that level of pain. But I'd formed this band, I was singing, and the bass player's girlfriend's brother came to a gig, and I ended up marrying him when I was 18 outside Chelmsford Registry Office. And that sort of fits into that well because we could all see that coming, you know. Went to the first person who could love me or look after me. And I moved in with him when I was 17. I was still at school. We had this whole debacle at school because my sixth form was attached to my school where they were writing to my husband to ask his permission for things. It was just insane. It will come as no surprise that marriage didn't actually work out. But that's where I found myself at 18, 19. Then. So I had my A-levels, I had my husband, had my broken leg and everything, and I had no family at all by this point. You know, my father's family didn't want anything to do with me. My mother's family didn't have anything to do with me. So it was just me and him. And that was a mess. that really was a mess. I wasn't drinking at that point. I hadn't stuck. So I know what alcohol is. I know what it does.
Well, you'd seen it firsthand.
So I wasn't going to do that. That was still my saving grace. But it was about to get worse.
It was about to get worse.
About to get worse.
Okay.
And it was about to get worse because what came next I did myself.
As opposed to
having had done to me.
Yeah. So does that bring us to the second photograph there with your daughter, or have we still got a way
Not
before we
really.
get there?
I'd finished my A-levels. I decided I wanted to go to uni. I always had that set as a path. I wanted to go to uni. And I wasn't sure how I was going to do that. And I didn't have anyone to ask. And I had a teacher at school I really liked, Willa Hoyes. She was my English teacher. My first love, absolutely literature. I love literature. I'm going off to see a Shakespearean play tonight, actually. And I decided I'd do literature. And I was going to go to Essex Uni in Colchester because that's where close to where I was living. It was easy. Myself and my first husband, Will, went and rented a house in Colchester, and that's what I was going to do. And none of this stuff was particularly planned because I can't stress enough. There was nobody for me to ask. I'd learned not to show weakness, not to say that I didn't know, not to go and ask anybody anything, just to somehow make it happen. Yeah. So I applied to Aberystwyth, to Essex, and somewhere else. Can't remember the third one, but I went to Essex because it was closer, and they said yes. And I did literature and philosophy because that's what I ended up doing. No other reason really. And Rill and I went. And he was working as a courier at the time in Chelmsford. And our marriage was already very broken. I was 18 and he was in his mid-20s, and it was like a Guns N' Roses video. It was all kind of hair and arguing. And I went to uni, really out of my depth, not really knowing what I was doing. And by this time I was in a mess. I'd started drinking and it spiraled quite quickly, and I alienated everybody. Lecturers, people, cohorts, people tried to get close to me and couldn't. I think Rill tried to care for me and love me, but I just made it impossible. I had no blueprint for that. And I just drank and drank and drank. I really took to drinking when I got to uni, more drinking than studying.
And yet it was, in some respects, it was the first time in your life that you'd actually been in control of what you were doing.
I guess, but it didn't feel that way. And Rill and I split up a couple of times. I had an affair, really stereotypically with his best friend, which I'm not even going to attempt to justify. And then his best friend ended up dying in a bike accident. And it was just this like roller coaster of awful things, most of which I've got to be honest went over my head, because by now I was firmly involved in my drinking and the me. Also knowing that I was doing this. This was happening to me because I was doing it. I was allowing it. I had this chance to do something great and I wasn't doing. And I knew that. So I drank. Rill and I split for a bit. I moved onto campus briefly, but I just had no means of looking after myself. I had none of the tools I needed. I was very reactive, so I knew how to react to things, but I didn't know how to really create things, I think. Moved back into the house that Rill and I had. Quite remarkably, we've managed to buy our own house at this point. I've always been quite driven in those kind of ways. And then I got pregnant with B, who's my eldest daughter, Bernadette. And I really thought I could make that different. I really did. I really thought I could, I don't know, retrofit my own childhood or be a better person, or
which is what every parent wants, I guess, isn't
it?
To make things better than
somehow live myself into a stability that I had it would be like needing a screwdriver and having a bar of chocolate. I just didn't have any of what I needed. And nor did Rill. I'd exhausted him by this point. And I think that's fair to say. I'd exhausted him and broken him. But he held on and tried. But I picked up drinking again and started to make some really big errors. I don't remember a lot of them, but I know they were there. And I got pregnant again with Ed. So Ed was born 18 months after B. And I graduated 6 months pregnant with Ed. He was born a couple of days before Christmas, by which point Rill wasn't working, I wasn't working, I had no uni, I had no money, I had a newborn baby who was not ideal. I love Ed to bits, but he was born screaming and screamed for about 6 months without stopping. It was absolutely horrific. I didn't know night from day. There was nobody to hand this baby off to. I've got no family, no brothers, no sisters, no aunts, no uncles, no mum, no dad. Nobody's going to be there for me. My marriage was broken. So I went back to drinking. I did what I did because that's what I did. And that came with its own mess. I was still singing occasionally, But, you know, I was flat broke. There was no money. And it was just spiraling. Real had become a bit physical, and eventually he left. So now I've got me, a toddler, a baby, no family, no network, no money, no job, and a drink problem.
And you're what, 21, 22?
I was 23.
23.
Yeah. And then it got bad. And it got really bad. And it was just this roller coaster of trying to pick up the right thing, trying to make it work, and dropping it, and trying to pick up the right thing and dropping it. And this baby who was really, really challenging, and a toddler who was amazing, but just no respite, no relapse, and everybody making it my fault. But I was genuinely doing the best I could. And I can remember it as like almost like peeling a carrot. It was like peeling my soul, like taking bits of my soul every day just to try and get to the end of it. And I was getting thinner and thinner and thinner, and I was physically very unwell. And I used to walk miles with this double buggy. I didn't have a car, couldn't afford to put heating on in the house. I was determined to keep the house because I didn't want to be homeless, I guess because I hadn't had a proper home as a child. But there was just no money. I took in ironing, I walked dogs, I did Avon, I did all these things, and I didn't know how to make any of it work. I got kind of like my first proper job, and all my money went on childcare. So I was still doing other jobs as well. So I've always worked a lot. I've never been scared of work, but I was always somewhere I needed not to be. I was always, if I was at work, I needed to be at nursery. If I was at nursery, I needed to be at a different work. It was all of that. And I was just drinking more and more and more. And there was sort of no space left. And then I met someone. That went well. Just going to gloss over that. Moved in with him, and that was not ideal. That was very not ideal. And in between this not ideal and that not ideal, I got involved in an abusive relationship, which was very not ideal, and that all ended up going to court. And that's when I realised that if someone wants to hurt you, nobody can protect you. Not really. And I got injured. I had my face broken and things in that relationship. Then I moved to this other relationship, which was differently awful, very coercive, and very abusive differently. I managed to get away from that relationship and set up again. And by this point, I was done. So I was 27. And I was just done. I had a proper job. I worked in a bank, and everyone knew I had a drink problem. When I talk about it now and I look back, I'm surprised that I only had a drink problem, actually. I'm surprised that I managed to get the kids to school, and I managed to get to work, and I rented this nice house with lots of garden and lots of land in Essex. And we had a dog, and we had all the bits that I wanted that made it look like it was okay, you know, but it wasn't. It just wasn't okay. And I was broken, and I knew I was broken, and I knew I couldn't function. And that would have been, we moved in the spring to that house, and it was in the October that I was sectioned into a mental health unit, an NHS mental health unit. So, so it was in the October that I was sectioned under the Mental Health Act. And the run up to that had been, and people are always shocked that I'm prepared to say this, but I think it's easy to judge someone by the worst thing they did, and this is the worst thing I did. So my children, being Ed, were still in primary school at this age, sort of top end primary school at this age, and they wanted to go swimming. It was a Saturday morning, and I put them into the back of the car, and I drove them to the swimming pool via the pub. And I was involved in a road accident, and I didn't stop. I did stop because the car was totaled. I left the scene of the accident, took the children with me. My son was injured in the accident. By the time the police arrested me and breathalyzed me, they took me to the cells. This was 11 o'clock on a Saturday morning, and I was 2 or 3 times over the drink drive limit. I hadn't got medical attention for my son. His nose was broken. I'm amazed it wasn't so much worse, just so much worse. My ex-husband came and got the children. I was in the cells, and I was so angry. How dare they arrest me? Did they not understand how hard it was to be me? Did they not understand?
Yes. Did you feel like they were judging you? And
I was just scared. It's the grandiosity of alcoholism, you know. And bear in mind, I knew what was wrong with me. I knew I was alcoholic. they needed to keep me overnight so I could be sober enough to answer questions. And I can remember having all these things in my head, like, well, if I say I ate a packet of peanuts, I mean, if you'd looked at me, I'd not eaten anything for about 3 years. And if I say it was this, and if I say it was that, I'm sure I can just get out of this. I'm sure I can just wriggle out of this. And I couldn't wriggle out of it. And they let me out of the cells that morning. And I've got no money, nowhere to go, what am I going to do? And I phoned the previous ex-boyfriend, the one that I'd just left. And he came and got me. And I don't really remember the next 3 weeks, if I'm honest, not really. It was that descent people talk about. So I didn't know if it was morning or night. I didn't know who came into the house. I don't know where I got the drink from because I couldn't drive now. The car was written off and I don't know what was real, so I can't say. I remember throwing up in a bucket. I remember, I just remember this descent. That's how I remember it. And it came to a Sunday and I decided this is stupid, I need to stop. I'm stronger than this, I can do this. And I just stopped drinking. By Thursday, I had spiders crawling out of my mouth and voices in the walls, and I was reasonably sure I was dying. And I phoned my ex-husband and my best friend, like one on the mobile, one on the house phone, and they both came. And I was sectioned into the lakes in Colchester, fully psychotic.
Which in some respects was the best thing that could have happened. Yeah.
Not at that exact moment in time.
No.
No. But I was quite like the Lord's Prayer to stop going around my head. And I could hear that film, Con Air. There's a bit in there where the paedophile singing, he's got the whole world in his hands. And I could hear that coming back through the walls at me. And I had huge spiders crawling out of my mouth and I was chewing and I could feel their legs in my mouth. And there were huge snakes and there was like the fire of hell. And I could see like images of my children with the skin burning off them. And this was so real, I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And I can remember throwing up and vomiting spiders. And I can still remember the consultant psychiatrist who was on duty at the time just going, yeah, I think we might bring her in right now. I can remember that really clearly. And I can remember a really kind nurse trying to explain to me that I would be okay. And then my mind did this flip, and I think it flipped back to the last thing I clearly remembered. And I was reading a book called 88 or 66 or something, and it was about Nazi Germany and people being experimented on. And my mind sort of took me there. And I'm told this afterwards by the staff, I can't really remember this, but apparently I became convinced that I wasn't being held in a psych unit. I was being held in Nazi Germany, and they were going to drain my blood and use it. So even in that state, I managed to mount an insurrection, and I went round all the other patients, managed to get them all to march on the front door to leave. And it was actually at that point that I was legally sectioned for my own welfare, which I think was a fair outcome.
I think it was probably the right decision.
I think it was probably.
So you describe it as psychosis, which I guess is where you just lose control and your mind just does.
My mind just went. Yeah. And I can remember it. It felt like I walked right to the very, very edge of like a canyon or something. So only my toes were gripping. Like I can remember it in my body. I can remember the feeling. Like only my toes were gripping on. And I can remember looking over. I can remember it so clearly. And not knowing if I was going to fall or not. And not even knowing if it was in my control. And it was a really, really long way back from there.
So how long did it take for you to work your way back from there?
Well, that was the November. And
you were still just in your sort of mid-20s?
Late 20s. I was 28. Hang on, how old am I now? 51, 27. So I was fortunate enough that I was moved to a priory. The nature of my, I often offer this like it was a gift to me. It absolutely wasn't actually. So the nature of my job, I worked for Barclays, who were not great, I'll be honest, to me at the time. But then now paid to do a job and I didn't because I was drunk. What can I say, you know? But I had health insurance with them. Now it's health insurance that I paid for. And for some reason I'd continued to pay for that, even though I was really skint and I'd cut back on lots of other things, but I'd had to continue to pay for that. And because of that, my ex-husband had managed to get me into a private healthcare unit. Now, normally when I tell this story, for some reason I just lie and say my father paid for it. He didn't at all. My father wouldn't have paid for something like that. So that's how I ended up in treatment. And I remember they used to take us out on like the Sunshine Bus once a week to go and do an activity like playing golf or going bowling, or which doesn't sound like much, but actually I can still remember now, I'm not playing golf. There's no way because I was worried I'd look stupid. I was on legal section in a mental health unit. Golf wasn't my biggest concern, and even like for the first maybe month or so that I was in there, I was determined I wasn't alcoholic. I would have happily signed up to anything other than alcoholism. I wasn't going to be that because that's what my mother was. So I wasn't going to be that. And I came out in the February, and I remember being really scared because actually being in treatment was the only time in my life I'd ever felt safe, like physically safe. And I hadn't realised.
With people around you who genuinely cared for you.
Yeah. And no one was going to hurt me. No one was going to attack me. No one was going to take my home or throw me out or refuse to feed me or all these things that I'd just absorbed as normal growing up. And I was just safe. And I didn't want to leave. I also didn't want to face, I was still on police bail. Didn't want to face that. I didn't want to face
Well, reality was out there, wasn't it?
I didn't want to try and get my kids back. I did all of those things that I didn't know how to do. Yeah, I didn't want to go out and do that. But I had to. So I left. And that was in the February. And I can remember my ex-husband picking me up. And I can remember the feeling in the car. And I can remember this was not going to be okay. A bit like when my mum died, knowing whatever was going to come next wasn't going to be okay. And somehow I was going to have to get through it. And I'd had to move the kids to school because they were getting picked on at school, and people were crossing the road in the street to shout at me because I was drink drive conviction.
So when the treatment ends and they decide that, yeah, you're okay.
Oh, they don't. It's just when the funding runs out.
Right.
And then I was in the supermarket one day with my ex-husband, and because he was then living in my house with my children, and that was a whole different trauma. And I needed to be grateful for him for coming and supporting me, but this is a marriage that had already broken down. This was not a great place to be, so there was all of that going on. But I was in the supermarket one day, and there was this lady who used to own the sandwich shop opposite the bank. Right, she's the sort of person that I'd previously have looked down on a little bit. Maybe she was a bit overweight and a bit. Anyway, so she collared me on the end of the aisle with, "Oh, we heard you've been ill. Nice to see you back," or something like that. And I was thinking, "Oh, what am I going to say?" Yeah. And it was the strangest thing, but I can remember it. Highwood's culture stuff, that's the Tesco's it was. And she said to me, "Well, we heard that it was the drink." Like when my mother-in-law says, "Let's be it was like that, it was the drink." So like no words came out, just that kind of like mouthing it. And every bit of my head said, say you had an anxiety disorder, say it was the car crash, say it was PTSD. And out of my mouth, I said, "Yes, I'm alcoholic."
Really?
Yeah,
was that the first time?
It was the first time I'd said it and meant it. And it did the most incredible thing. It gave me back the power. Now, she didn't have a stick to beat me with, because nobody can come to me and say you're alcoholic now. Because I'm going to go, "Yeah, I am. I am, actually. I'm alcoholic. My name's Colette and I'm alcoholic." And all of a sudden, I owned that. And whilst it wasn't okay, it's not something I didn't put my hand up at school when I was 3 and say I want to be a ballerina and an alcoholic, I hadn't asked for that.
But it's yours.
But it's mine. Yeah. And it was in that moment, and it was that lady, the lady with the bacon sandwich shop. Can't remember her name, but I can see her even now. And that changed then. And I didn't have to hide it. It didn't feel like I was holding on to these broken pieces of glass that were hurting me, and I was holding on to them.
Because that takes a lot of energy, doesn't it, to keep all those things in. And where you need energy for other things. And perhaps once you stop using all your energy for those things, you can use it for actually recovering. Yeah,
and that's what I did. And I did recovery through AA. It's about the only thing that was available in those times. And it was hard. I'm not going to say it was easy, because it wasn't. The hardest thing was I stopped smoking. But I took it really seriously. I didn't want to do anything that took me closer to a drink. And because I associated smoking with drinking, it was so hard. It took me 6 months. So hard, yeah. And I never started again because I could never stop again. And I never had another drink again, actually, ever. Because I don't think I could stop again. I haven't got that in me again. I wouldn't take that risk. So I had to rebuild a life. So identity reconstruction. Who was I going to be? I had to rebuild it with other people having quite a vocal opinion on me as well, and who I was. And I've still got no support, no family. No one's in my corner. And I had to build a new set of friends. So I stopped singing. I realised that I couldn't really stay sober be in and out of pubs and clubs and things like that. I moved my kids to school. My ex-husband moved out. We'll just again gloss over that because that was a bit of a challenge. And I did maintain that gratitude to him because he did come and help when he had no reason to. I retrained, so I retrained as a therapist. I went back to uni, trained in Rogerian counselling. I was more interested in doing kind of strategy and looking at how society gets us to this position than the individual. And I still believe that society kind of sets up all the bricks and then points at the person for having picked them up. I was in Tesco's the other day and there was this big glass like the size of a fishbowl that said Mummy's Prosecco, wine o'clock or something. So no one likes a drunk mum, though, do they? So I don't see how you can blame someone for doing what you've told them to do. But actually, I then needed a job. I need to be able to pay the bills. I had a very fractured relationship with my children, as you can imagine. It's still at times challenging, and I accept that as fair. And then it was about what was I going to do next? So weirdly, I'm still in the same place I kind of started with: no skills, no family, no backing, no, just me. What am I going to do? How am I going to do this? And I was probably 30 by that point. Interestingly, the same age my eldest daughter, the little girl in that picture, the same age she is now.
But with very different experiences to the ones that you'd had over those 30 years.
I don't know. And you'd have to ask her what being the eldest child of an alcoholic was like, what having her mother sectioned was like, what her experience of living her life was like, what going to school was like. It was a small community. People knew, people talked. What that instability was like, what the fear was like, how it is now, how it is she's got 3 children, how it is for her parenting now. Interestingly, she doesn't drink. How having a relationship with me is now. I couldn't have been a better mother than I was at the time because I did the very best I could. Like, what am I going to do today off yesterday's terrible decision, But if I could take it back and do it differently with what I know now and the skills available to me, of course I would. Everybody wants better for their child than I did for her.
Yeah, we can all see that in different ways. Yeah. Wow. So this brings us, we'll skip a little bit of time. And put a little bit more up to date. But before we do that, should we have I think we need a bit of a break, don't we?
I think we all do. Everyone can breathe.
I'm sure the viewers do. So we have a little, we'll breathe, and then we'll find out a bit more about what you're doing now. Is that okay? Great. So welcome back. We've got a nice cup of tea. So, and also, as with all of our guests, I asked you what your favourite biscuit was.
I feel Colette, really bad about this now.
I think you should, because, you asked for a plate of rich teas. I would suggest, are they really biscuits or are they just edible coasters? But you're the guest, so you get to choose. So
let's have a bit of honesty here. What you said was, as a crew, you're able to eat the leftover biscuits. So you'd hoped for kind of some chocolate covered indulgence.
Yeah, I did say that.
You did say that.
And it is true. So, yes, we are going to enjoy the remainder of this packet of rich teas. So, thank you.
You're so not. I'm taking them with me.
Oh, well, even better.
I love a rich tea.
So,
thank you.
And I shall have one also, and I will try to enjoy it.
Dunk it.
Oh, well, that's it. That's when it gets dangerous, isn't it? Because they're not the most dunkable of biscuits.
A bit of risk is good for you.
Dangerous living. Hey. Right, there we go.
You're going to end up covered in it.
I hope everyone's enjoying watching us eat biscuits.
Like a cat eating sand.
So that was a tough listen, and I'm sure, well, obviously a tough life and upbringing.
Yes and no. Remember, when you live something, you're just living your day. It's often only when we talk about it afterwards, and it runs through our perception of now and our knowledge of now that I didn't live it all in one go.
Yeah, so we've listened to that in the space of, what, half an hour, an hour. Whereas you lived it over 20 odd years.
Yeah. And there were some really good days. You know,
you could have told us about the good days.
I left out the really bad ones. Yeah.
So then, so now we're kind of late 20s, and you're embarking on this career as a
therapist.
Which is something you still.
I still do. I still practice. I absolutely love it now. I really genuinely love that work. So I did a few things in the intervening years. I trained in therapy, set up a practice. It's had various iterations, the practice. This was all back in the South. I met my husband, Andy, who is without exception the most astonishing human being I've ever had the privilege to know. And anyone who knows us knows that that is just very true. It's very, very true. And he steadfastly loved me until I was able to accept it. Just that simple. He doesn't drink because I don't drink. And we've got 2 children. So we went on, we got married, we've got 2 kids, 2 girls. They are now in their teens. So I've got my 2 eldest children from my first marriage and my 2 youngest children. Andy has his own business. He works internationally, and he is a properly good laugh. Terrible cook. Absolutely awful cook. But he's a good laugh. So we got married. We left the South and moved to the North. Andy's from York, so we moved up to York for lots and lots of reasons, but sort of personal reasons really, to do with the children and his family and things. And we did that when the girls were little. They were 1 and 2. And I'd intended to set up a new practice up here. This isn't a long conversation. It's just like a fact, kind of fact explanation. I ended up not doing that, and I took 6 years out completely because I was diagnosed with breast cancer when Mog was 1, and the treatment I had took quite a long time. I had a lot of surgery, so my body was cut quite a lot, and I was quite ill during that time. We had a house in York, then we moved out out towards Hull way, and then we moved out towards Leeds way, and kind of moved around a bit, and we finally settled in Thirsk, where we've lived for the last 8 years, but it could actually be a bit longer. Bought a big old house, renovated it room by room. I never thought I'd be the sort of mummy who would be able to kind of spend the morning choosing paints and the afternoon walking my Labrador, and then the late afternoon doing the school pick up and making cookies in the kitchen. So I'm not saying it was all like that. There are some challenges with being a corporate wife, and there were some challenges with being a mother, but it was like doing a completely different thing from having my first children. And the difference wasn't really me, it was my environment. It was the support, and I'm still the same me that I am. So that kind of brought us up to would have been about 4 years ago, I guess. Andy and I were out for dinner one evening, and I can't remember which restaurant, I can't remember which evening, because there were so many of them where this happened, and there was a tasting menu and all these wines got brought out, and Andy just had water, and I asked for an alternative, and I was given a plastic blast like you'd serve to a toddler, like a plastic cup from a kid's party with something like Fanta or Lilt in it. And I was just
not really
so
the right
angry.
Cup you went to a
No, I had my good dress, great lipstick, I was looking all that, and it wasn't relevant to me, to the occasion, to the meal, or anything. It was just insulting, and I just didn't want that. So we had gone back to our hotel for the night, and as we got into bed, I said to Andy, I'm going to make one. Really, how hard could it be? How hard could it be just to make a drink, put it in a bottle, and make it something I want to drink that hasn't got any alcohol in? That's what I'm going to do. And Andy, bless him, God love Andy, just went, okay, darling, how can I help? There've been many, many occasions in the last sort of years past that where I've kind of wished he'd said, shut up and go to sleep. But that is how it started. There was no more to it than that. I just thought, how hard can it be?
And that's the perfect combination. There's yourself who just thinks, who has no barriers, or
No barriers.
just, I'm going to do this.
Neurodiversity at its finest.
And Andy, who just supports you in what you do. Yeah.
Well, I like to think of it, and he often says it's like going behind me with a dustpan and brush, picking up the pieces. But yeah, that is how it goes.
And so you just like that decided, yeah, I'm going to start an alcohol-free drinks company.
Yeah, I didn't even know what I was going to make because I'm not particularly well placed to make it. I don't drink alcohol. I don't drink soft drinks. I don't really hang around bars and restaurants. When I did drink, I didn't drink pretty. I drank to get absolutely shit-faced. So what am I going to make? I didn't even know what it was going to be, you know.
So how did you start?
Well, I did as I do everything. I sat up in bed. I got my paper and my pad, I like a list, and my phone, and I started Googling, you know, what do people drink who aren't alcoholic, and things like that. And I just kind of started at the beginning and thought, well, what do I want this to be? What do I want the end product to be? Not all the steps in the middle that I don't know how to do, just what do I want it to be at the end? And actually, the first iteration, I came up with this kind of idea of kind of a kombucha type. I wanted something that was ubiquitous, that could be anywhere, that was an anytime drink, that you'd just take like in a 4-pack to a barbecue or something like that. I kind of had that in my head. Then I realised I don't particularly like kombucha. And then I found out if you leave it to ferment long enough, it goes alcoholic and all these other things. And I thought, I'm not going to make that. And I went and I spoke to a tech company, like a food tech company who make drinks. And we had a bit of a go at making something, but it was the wrong side of cold herbal tea. I mean, it was awful. And I think because I've got that real clarity of truth, I often feel like I'm the kid in the Emperor's New Clothes, that fairy tale, the one shouting naked. I'm not going to pretend it's okay if it isn't. I don't really have that. So I thought, well, that's rubbish. Then I went and spoke to a brander who charged an absolute fortune to give me something that was rubbish. I thought, that's all rubbish, isn't it? And I was all a bit disheartened and sad. And I thought, well, I'm just going to go back to therapy. I'll open a new clinic. That's what I'll do. And then my father took sick, very sick, actually. He died. And I decided I would go down south. I didn't want to be that person you read about on the front page of the tabloids. It's like, you know, old man dies in sea of newspapers, or old hoarder. And we all read the title and think, where were the family? I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to go either, I'll be honest. But I went. And I was gone on and off for about 6 months during the period of him kind of worsening and then going into a care home and then dying and then clearing the house, which is therapeutically the best thing that has ever happened to me in my life. Yeah, I didn't think I'd do it myself. I thought I'd send a team in, but actually I went in and I did it. Took a long time, but I took everything out, completely renovated the house, which I knew how to do, having had done mine, and sold it to a nice new family who I really hope are having a nice life in there. And that was amazing, really amazing. Came back home, and then we had a pandemic. We were all locked down. That was a lot. So it was me, Andy, the girls, the dogs, all looking at each other like, wow, this is a bit close. And then the girls went back to school and they wanted to go on board. So my girls, they board. The school is like in the same postcode I live. And Andy sort of built his business, but went back to sort of running his business again and all of that. And I thought, okay, I'm going to have one more go at this. How hard can it be? And what was interesting is in those intervening years, the sector had grown. Because when I started, there wasn't a no-low sector. So one of the things I was hearing a lot from people, well, what even is it? Where's it going to sit in the supermarket? How's it going to be served? And I couldn't answer because I didn't know. And in those intervening years, this sector had grown up. And there was a lot of AF beers and wines and spirits and ciders and mead and all sorts of things. And there's like everything from 0% to 3%, de-alcoholized, never had alcohol in it, all sorts of things. And then it just became a matter of choice. And so I had a look at what was available. Didn't want to drink beers and wines and things. I don't really want that calorie load, as we've seen from my choice of biscuits. I didn't want particularly wines necessarily. It's a bit too close to my drinking profile. And with the spirits, I just wanted something that was fun, that shouted fun. Everything else just felt a little bit like the absence of joy, you know. Yeah. So I wanted fun. And for me, that's always going to be Wham, Club Tropicana, Malibu. You know, just that. And weirdly, it's never a reality I actually had. That was never my reality with alcohol. it was always a mess, me and everyone around me. But I had that image from like the 80s, and and I just wanted to create that, and I wanted it to be not bad for me, not massively sugary, nothing artificial, but fun, and beautiful, really, really beautiful. So I went off and found a different company to help me create it, which they did. I did find a brand that actually that first set of branding wasn't ideal, and I ended up asking my friend who's an artist to do it. So she does all, if I lean out of my back gate, I can see her front door. She's called Gemma. So she did all the rebrand, which is all the stuff that we see.
So we can see it all.
Yeah, all the stuff there. And I made the light, which is the Malibu, and the dark, which loosely sits like a Morgan Spiced, I guess. In that kind of dark rum space. People tend to like one or the other. And I've just launched my first set of sober sundowners, which are the pre-canned kind of ready to drink sober cocktails. So there's a dark rum sour and a kind of a coconut margarita loosely.
Well, should we clear the table, and then we can really see what you've been working on for the last few years?
Yeah.
Talk us through it. Yeah?
Of course.
Okay. So we've magically lost the teapot and the biscuits and replaced it with something far more interesting. So you created, well, there are two brands on show here.
All of that.
Out of nothing, knowing nothing about any of this, 2 years?
I took my first commercial run 18 months ago.
So less than 2 years. Right. So talk us through what we...
We're in December now.
Yeah.
So the trial run came May 22, and the commercial run for Myth came August 22, and for Goat was October 22.
Right. So for those of you watching in the future, we're now in December 23, so yeah, 18 months and less. So your kind of passion was to create a range of drinks that were alcohol free, but weren't about what isn't in them. They're about what is in them, or what they mean, with a warm Club Tropicana kind of vibe. And I think it's safe to say you've pretty much. So which was the first one that you?
So I made the white and the dark in the bottles first, and I did the liquid formulation of the white can first, the one that says Goat on it.
So Myth is a...
Myth and Goat are two completely separate brands.
So Myth is a
rum.
Aspiring to, or similar to, a rum-based...
Yeah, it's a cane spirit. So when it went all through trading standards, that's where we came out at. It's a cane spirit, but without alcohol. And in the mix, it will behave the way... It's not designed to be clever in as much as there's no adaptogens or nootropics or anything like that in there. It's simply a replicant. So if you were to make a drink with a white spirit, you can take that white spirit out and put that white spirit in.
Both mojitos and...
Yeah, coconut mojito, daiquiri, Bellini, Paloma, Cane Collins, anything like that. Anything you can think. So if I'm looking at a restaurant's menu, the drinks menu, I just did it with one the other week. There's no retraining of the staff. You just take that out and put that in. That's fine. And then with the dark, the same. But actually the dark, I said a lot more dark than light to Canada and North America. So I think it's a taste profile expectation, and it will sit where a rum would sit, but also kind of where a whiskey would sit as well. Yeah, it'll do a good old fashioned. It'll do a good, does a really great espresso cocktail. But again, I made them. You can make fancy serves. That's all fancy. But for really easy, simple serves, you want a Malibu and Coke. There you go. You want a rum and Coke. There you go. Done.
And I've had a mojito made with that, and it's fantastic. And you don't miss the alcohol, and I guess that's the point, isn't it? It's not about what isn't in it. It's about just enjoying it for what it is.
There's been a couple of my friends actually took the white one to a hen weekend and just didn't tell anyone. Yeah, and they were all drinking it that night, and all surprised they woke up without hangovers the next morning. Yeah, but they didn't know because they weren't told. I also wanted them not to be bad for me, so there aren't like the usual additives, preservatives, artificial things in it. They have got, I believe they've got potassium sorbate in, so that once they're open, they'll last for about a month to 6 weeks. Otherwise, they'd just go off because there's no alcohol in them. The white one's got 23 calories a serve, and the dark one's got about 9. So they're vegan, they're gluten free. In fact, the white one won the Free from Food Awards drink of the year and the gold medal, which I think is quite unusual for something in that category. And it's just won the Taste Award 2-star as well. But it was about the taste. It's about writing your own story, making your own choices, as your connectivity, memories, all those things that alcohol promises and just doesn't deliver. Just that. But with a smile, you know. It's not a health food. If you want something really good for you, go drink water.
Yeah, this is all about having fun, isn't it? But a different kind of, not a different kind of fun, but a healthier kind of.
Yeah, maybe it is a different kind of fun. Maybe it is an iteration. This isn't as it was when I was a teenager. People don't want to get off their faces all the time anymore. You know, living's quite expensive. People want to be able to be part of their experiencing. You know, remember what they did last night. Be accountable. I think a lot of that is social media. You know, if I'd have known everything I ever did was going to be up on YouTube in 2 minutes, I was like, arse end up on cider in a hedge, I might have thought twice about it. So I think it's a different time now. That's what these are for.
So what was it? So they were the first two that you created, and what kind of response did you get? How were they received?
Oh, well, unusually for me, actually, I felt really exposed. So the process of creating them was actually quite difficult. I'm not going to talk about it, but it was very difficult and made a lot harder by certain people who were paid to make it easier. However, so by the time I got them, I was feeling a bit bruised and a bit exposed. So I just put them in the garage. And Andy, bless him, was like, sweetheart, we're going to have to do something with these because I can't get the car out. So he entered them into the IWSC, the International Wine and Spirits competition, which is, you know, internationally, you know, a really well considered benchmark. And it was really to test the market. You know, had I made something worth drinking? And I was terrified. I felt like a kid and no one was going to come to my party. And I know what that felt like. You know, I was really, really worried.
And to be up against some pretty big players, I would imagine.
Globally, you know, not just, but globally. Yeah. And the dark one took the bronze. Wow. And the white one took the gold, but it also took the global trophy as the best non-alc product available.
From someone who a few months earlier had no idea.
I hadn't even launched. And I don't think I knew what it meant either because I still hadn't really launched. So that gave me an immediate issue because at the same time as doing those, I'd done the liquid formulation for the white can for goat and actually all launched under the brand of goat. But that sort of didn't make sense because goat's an energy drink.
Yeah, so that's quite a different
audience. And it sounds a bit silly now, but it hadn't occurred to me at the time. So it became really apparent really, really quickly. So I spoke to my...
So that's the large cans there.
Yeah, so the white can and the pink can. So I spoke to my accountant who suggested that we immediately split the company into Myth Drinks and Goat Drinks, which we did. And then I decided just to put Goat down for a couple of months while I kind of caught up with myself a bit and began to understand the business of the business. And I learn very experientially, so I can only do it by doing it. Can't tell me, I'm not that person. I just have to learn. So I sort of set about learning, because people would say to me things like, is it for at home or on trade? I don't understand the question. How many SKUs have you got? I don't understand the question. You know, it was a bit like that. So it's been a bit of a steep learning curve. I then went on...
Well, that's true for anyone starting in something, isn't it? Yeah, any entrepreneur. Yeah. So anyone out there who's never done anything before.
It's new.
And it is a steep learning curve, but that's kind of the point, isn't it?
Today's your day.
Because everyone has to learn these things at some point.
Someone said to my husband, actually, what made your wife think she could do this? And he just said, nobody told her she couldn't. Yeah. And I think that's true. But it has been a challenge. I then went on to win the World Alcohol Free Awards as the best non-alc spirit globally. Taste Awards, San Francisco Bartender Awards. I've just been told I'm in the finals for the People's Choice Award, and the other people in the finals are Diageo Spirit and Sentia. So that's not a bad place to find myself, is it? Good company. Again, I've still got no backers, no funders, no clear route to market. I've got no staff. No one works for me. My friend Gemma does the artwork. Andy's an unpaid box packer. It's all been funded by me. I export to Canada, North America, Africa, and parts of Europe. Just started going out to Australia and New Zealand. And people phone and they'll say, oh, can I speak to your marketing team? It's like, that's me. Can I speak to your logistics team? That's still me. So that's, even if I close the door on it now, that'd be one hell of an achievement. And I did that. And I'm really, really proud of it.
Yeah, so you should be.
But it's not been easy, and I do feel quite exposed.
Yeah. Well, it's a huge pond you're now swimming in with some big sharks. Yeah, exactly. So it's not surprising that you feel quite exposed. It'd be strange if you didn't.
Yeah. And there's been some poor behaviours. Some of them have been my own. I think when you feel exposed and a bit vulnerable, you get a bit jittery. It's been a lot of work, a lot of activations, some really cool things, some great travelling.
Well, you've told me some every time we meet. So tell us some of the, because I think, were you in on the King's coronation? You had something to do with that. Come on, tell us about that.
So I was in Dubai and I provided the drinks at the embassies for the King's coronation. I was out there and I met Jo Malone, which was just like really exciting.
Was she providing the candles?
My husband said that. It's all about the candles. I have just been to Riyadh. I've hosted a sober yacht party in Jersey. I partnered with the PFA, Professional Football Association, and with Rolls-Royce and Bentley. I was at the Polo. I mean, I've done so many things. I've been to the House of Lords twice. I've been in the finals of all sorts of things, from the Lloyd's Business Person of the Year to... I mean, just so many things. I actually can't rattle them off my head now. It's been a really busy...
I mean, it's a great product, but that is still a really impressive road of awards. I mean, so how has that come about?
Well, some of them... Well, I think it kind of helps. I've got the only alcohol-free Malibu that there is, so that matters. The one more has just been released, actually. I'm not bothered by that competition. We'll park that. But up until that, there was nothing else in that space. But I think it's because I haven't replicated the drink, because I don't drink. So I've not gone and drunk a bottle of Malibu and then said, make it taste like that. I've kind of created a memory.
Yeah. Taking the essence of what that is.
Yeah. And what all that it means. But also I'm intensely practical and transactional. So I kind of know what I wanted it to do. And I've just not tried to be that clever with it. And I'm iterative as well. I can pivot quite quickly. So that when I needed to rebrand, I did that. And those sort of things, I can make that happen quite quickly. And also, I've had the support of Andy, which means, and I can't stress this enough, I know that if I phoned him now and just said, Andy, I'm done with this, I've had enough, he'd go, all right, darling, how can I help? No pain, no shame. So I can take the risk, you know, which I think it's easy to underestimate that, but I don't owe anybody anything. I've not taken any funding. I just get to choose myself. Yeah.
Do you think that, because I would imagine that some of the big players like Diageo, who've been making alcoholic drinks for centuries, for them to create a non-alcoholic version of their drinks, they probably just think, well, we'll just find a way to take alcohol out and it'll do the same thing. Whereas you've approached it from a completely different angle, haven't you? You've tried to take the essence, as you say, the
point.
Yeah,
the point of what we say it does.
The joy, the happiness that people get, and try to give them that without...
Whilst feeling included and validated and valued, you know. So much, I know as an alcoholic woman, you know, I didn't drink to be pretty. I wasn't overly welcome. When I stopped drinking, I also wasn't overly welcome, and there was nothing to drink that was pretty. It is that. So stop that now. We can stop that now. I mean, people like Diageo, I've got to be a bit careful what I say, but people like Diageo, I suppose my concerns, I mean, they do fund some non-alc startups, not mine, but some. Those messages, a lot of the non-alc space is for sober curious, so people are just not having a drink this time. Absolutely get that. Not everyone's got a problem. But that's not me. I have got a problem. But the Diageo's own non-alcs, you know, like Gordon Zero as opposed to Gordon's, or Tanqueray Zero as opposed to Tanqueray, they're in exactly the same bottles. So they're being used to advertise alcohol where you wouldn't otherwise advertise alcohol, because you see the bottle and that's Gordon's. You know, so it happens to be zero, but that's...
Whereas this isn't an alcohol-free version of something else. This is what it is, and it stands on its own 2 feet.
Yep. So that's what I did. I've just made on the smaller cans, they are pre-made sober sundowners. So one is loosely based on kind of a watermelon margarita, which uses the white spirit, and the other one is a rum sour, which uses the dark spirit. And that's because with all the feedback we've had, people don't always want to commit to a big bottle. These things are astonishingly expensive to make. So people often ask why the non-alc's expensive, because I think they're more expensive to make than alcohol. But they want to try. And also people aren't really sure what to do with it. So I've just started to make those as an at-home or events out-of-home offering.
Cool. And then the goat is a different, animal altogether, isn't it? So that's very much a...
First thing I always get asked is, why is it called goat? Okay, and that's because I'm Capricorn. Okay, so the first iteration was called the horny goat, which most people still know it as. And I repeat, it's because I'm Capricorn. But I couldn't get it into bricks and mortar like that. So it's been rebranded to Original Goat. And the sugar-free one, which is the pink one, is called the Funky Goat. I've got a new one coming out next week, which has got a vegan BCAA in it, and that's called the Groovy Goat. And then there's going to be a caffeine-free one suitable for under 16s or people who choose not to have caffeine. And that, subject to some current IPO issues, is going to be called Easy Goat. They're kind of where that's going to sit. I'm going to do some powders for runners, probably some gels and maybe some bars at some point as well. But that's kind of moving probably back end of Q3 next year. So Goat, I made in liquid formulation. I didn't really think about it as anything other than it was just another drink. When it came to market, I realized it was so different, just so different. And
so what makes it different to the range?
It is like so cool. It is so different.
Obviously, but
I wanted to make something that was an energy drink, so not a health drink, not a wellness drink, an energy drink like Red Bull or Monster or any of those, which was non-gender specific. So I was at an event recently where Monster were, and they were so gendered they even had on-site barbers. Yeah, really? Yeah. That didn't require you to leap out of a plane attached to a parachute whilst riding a BMW or whatever it was they were doing, like the Red Bull were doing the other day. You know, most people actually are not going to climb Everest before supper. They're not going to go whitewater rafting on Tuesday. They're not going to leap out of a plane for any reason. They're not going to do that, and that's fine. Most people are trying to get the kids to school, trying to get through work, maybe play a game of five-a-side, possibly walk the dog. And I guess my work as a therapist makes me know that people already feel they're doing enough, and that's, you don't need to be told you should be doing more. But also, I didn't want something that was bad for me. You know, having made these drinks, I know what goes in drinks, and I know what goes in the process, and I know what the ingredients do. And I was reading the back of some of the cans, thinking, I'm not drinking that, I'm not having that, I'm not drinking that. But actually, a lot of the health cans, the claims they're making are non-substantiated claims. You know, they're not, with the best will in the world, essence of lacewing fly has got no evidential proof, you know. So I wanted to make something between the kind of chemical slurry of some energy drinks and the waft and pastel colours of some health food drinks. So I wanted it to do what it said it was going to do, not taste awful, and not be bad for me.
And look cool.
And look cool. I wanted to have that touch of punk, you know, and I made Goat. So the initial one is a really light flavour. I think if you're a Monster drinker, you think it probably tastes like water. It tends to be the Red Bull drinkers who come to me. The sugar-free one has actually got sucralose in it. So that was my one thing I had to... I tried to do stevia, it didn't work. So I ended up with sucralose as the sweetener. But if you want no calories, no carbs, no sugar, there has to be something that gives. That's what gives. They've got a blend of vitamins, minerals, coenzyme Q10, all the caffeine's natural, with the top percent coming from green coffee bean. Legal claims that it can legally make on the can. It will support everything from your testosterone uptake, your libido, heart function, immune system, blood supply, cognitive function, hair, skin, teeth, and nails. You know, the list is massive, and that's just the things we can actually claim. And as I say, except for the sweetener in the red can and in the new Groovy, there's nothing artificial at all in them.
Now, clearly, you're not at your kitchen table developing all of these drinks, so you must have some amazing partners that you work with.
I do. And that's actually been probably the biggest thing I've learned, that it's the people. You need to get those relationships, get those people, work with people you trust and know, and people who can work with me. I'm not everyone's cup of sunshine, you know. So some of it weirdly was at the kitchen table. It's choosing flavours, that initial. Otherwise, you're going to go somewhere and say, make me a drink. And they go, what do you want it to taste like? I don't know. So getting those flavors, those base flavors I wanted, and kind of the function. These are functional drinks. It's functional energy. So that was really important. And some of those functional flavors, or those functional ingredients, have a flavor that needs masking or covering or something. So that's worth knowing. So I use Queen Margaret's University in Edinburgh. They do all my trials and all my innovation. They're absolutely excellent. I've got a canning and a bottling partner, 2 different canners, 1 bottler. And that's to do with kind of the size of run that you're doing. So one of the canners who does goat, for example, will do 50,000 cans of goat in one go. So they can go through his plant. But actually, when we're doing the small trials, so like the labelled cans at the moment, they're the trials. We want much smaller amounts of those made to make sure that they work. So it's a bit like, when you paint your kitchen and you go to B&Q and you put like a little bit on the wall in the kitchen, you think that's amazing. And then you paint the whole room and you think that looks like a care home. Right, exactly. Well, it's a bit like that with drinks. Sometimes when you make them in big, something changes. So you don't want 50,000 litres. So I make my big cans are done, the big runs are done in Wales, and the smaller cans are in the Malvern Hills. And then at the moment, my bottles are bottled, both the small ones and the big ones are bottled in Reading with the Natural Food Company. So if I'm going to do any innovation, I go straight to Katrina at the university, food tech at the university. If I'm doing bottling or canning, I go to my partners there. And then all of my artwork, everything you see that comes out comes from Gemma Simmons at my graphics company, Metal Graphics Company. And that's everything from the tiles on Insta to the artwork on the bottles and the cans. And she is incredible, actually. She's one of the people I don't think I could do this without her. Like actually do it without her, like the mechanics of it.
Yeah. So it sounds like you found some amazing people too.
I have. I found some not amazing people, but I found some great people as well. Yeah, I have. I don't have a team. I desperately need community manager, social media, photographer, videographer, as well as logistics, production, sales. Route to market's still the biggest issue. And it's that catch-22 of without funders, I haven't got the money to get the people in, but I can't grow it. Because these are 2 completely separate businesses with 2 completely separate audiences, both of which I run entirely on my own, whilst running other businesses as well to pay the bills. That is a lot. Yeah. And I'm not 20, so that really is a lot. But that's kind of where I find myself with them. I've only just really gone to market properly with goat because I was focusing on myth. And I started by going into community to find out which communities wanted to adopt it.
Because that's taking you to some crazy places as well.
I've had such a laugh. I've been to Insomnia, the gamers thing. That was my husband's not the biggest fan of sci-fi and cosplay and things like that. It makes him uncomfortable. So we were at cosplay. It was the cosplay bit of Insomnia. So he was already a bit itchy. And then the hotel we were staying in, kid you not, I was hosting the World Sci-Fi Conference, and he was just like, so many Gandalfs. We were at the Cornwall Tattoo Festival. We have just been at the Ministry of Sound at the weekend. We have done the world champion downhill one-wheelers, which is it's like a snowboard motorised on one wheel with no brakes, downhill at Glencoe. We sponsor skateboards and artists and dirt bikers and like all the really cool stuff, and that is fun, yeah. As you can tell by me smiling, there are times that Andy and I are they're going to think we're lost, what are you doing here? But everyone's really welcoming, and I guess because it's a fun drink. Yeah. Obviously, it's quite a clear market problem. You've got Coke, Red Bull, Monster. Where do you find shelf space? I didn't know, and I'm saddened to know the mechanics of sales in the UK. The stranglehold. It's virtually a monopoly. You're having to buy shelf space, buy into the distributors, buy into the wholesalers. It's hundreds of thousands of pounds. People go into shops and they think they've got choice. They haven't. It's what's been paid to go on those shelves. And I just didn't know that. I kind of thought if I made the best, it would just sell. I still sell a lot more, about 80% more myth out of the country than I do in the country. and I still don't have any kind of sensible route to market for either product in the UK. And I don't see, and I can't understand why that is. And nor do I really know what to do about it, if I'm honest, because I don't want to go down that big funding model where you have that kind of inflated growth and all of that. I just think, well, if people in gyms or at events want goat, well, let's put it on the shelves and see if people buy it. You know, if people want a non-alc option, well, let's just put these on the shelves and see if they buy it. Just put it on the bar, see if they buy it. But I'm really struggling to make that happen. And I say it's the stranglehold that the big players have got.
So how do we get our hands on these amazing drinks?
My websites, which are Goat and Myth, Amazon stock, some specialist non-alc retailers stock the non-alcs. I am on quite a few bars now. If you go on the websites, you'll see I am actually about to have the websites rebuilt as well, for lots of reasons. The Goat one's going to be more outlooking with out-facing calendars for people's kind of people who do all the activities and things. So I wanted to feel more like a hub, you know, just go to Goat. You want to know what's going on? Go to Goat. Yeah. Myth, I just need it to act in a more international way. So those sites are being rebuilt. So there might be a period of time when they're not as easy to use as might be hoped. But there are lists of stockists on there. And really anybody who wants to try, give it a go, let me know. It is only me. It can be me who answers. Email me.
Okay, and we'll make sure all that information is available to you guys who are watching. So what's next for? Because, you know, as if you haven't done enough already, what
else am I doing? So I want to increase the sober serves range, so those RTDs, and probably do some more export. I'm going to the Middle East.
Because that must be a big market for you, is it?
Not really, because if you don't drink alcohol, why would you need a replacement? But there are things changing over there. It's always the same problem though, you know, the big players go in, they've got the money, they've got the power, so I don't know, I'll be honest with you. I think without sensible route to market, I don't know past the end of next year. I need to be able to sell it really. But some more sober sundowners. I want to increase the range so it becomes more than just the drinks, so that it's kind of got somewhere to exist in people's day. With Goat, I've got 2 more SKUs coming on board, and that is just about bricks and mortar, route to market. That just needs, because it's a low margin product, so you know it needs to be volume, and really to see how that goes. Outside of the drinks, obviously there's my doctorate, which I think I'll still be doing when I'm 500 years old, and also I'm just the beginnings of writing a play.
Okay, and why not?
William Shakespeare,
at some point in his life, had never written a play.
At this point in my life, I have never written a play. And
with William Shakespeare in his early years.
I want to write a play about Mad Alice in New York, because she was not mad. She was just Alice. And I firmly believe that whilst we continue to commodify suffering, make some she was a battered wife who was driven insane. You know, so why don't we just name a gin after her? Why don't we just name a street after her? Why don't we just make that a tourist attraction? Because for as long as we make it okay, we're saying it's okay. So I'm writing a play called Alice. Changing the narrative. I have literally no idea how to write a play called Alice, but I'm sure it will be fine.
And really, you've changed the narrative of your life, haven't you? The first half.
Oh, nicely done.
I thought so.
Smooth.
I thought so. We haven't rehearsed this. Because as we've heard, the first half was pretty rough. And you've flipped it. And I think it seems that a lot of the things that you, that were a feature of your early years, you've kind of, you now own those things.
Yeah, that is true, actually.
They've become something that has enabled you to do all of this.
I mean, to be clear, I believe that all children deserve love and respect, and I should not have been raised like that. I'm not grateful for it. Mm-hmm. But it was a bit of a training camp. I still get a bit envious and jealous when people have those kind of nice families, and it's a kind of a safety that I guess I didn't have. Yeah. I always feel like I have to prove myself. I have to be more. I have to be the best. I have to do it as much as I can in order to justify being alive, being in my existence, kind of earn that love. But yeah, I probably have been afforded a lot of freedom in a lot of ways other people maybe don't have. We'll see where it goes. There's always something else to do.
Yeah, well, indeed. Yeah, a doctorate. So 2 drinks brands, a psychotherapy practice, a doctorate, writing a play, and your podcast that you do with 2 of your friends.
The doctor, the therapist, and the coach. So we wrote a book at the end of last year, and that's really around health, hormones, and happiness. Women, particularly, sex, hormones, well-being, physicality. That kind of accountability to self, and how we can begin to really create an identity we want to exist in. How we can thrive, not just survive. So Angela's a doctor, Gemma's a coach, obviously I'm a therapist, and we wanted to bring those 3 sets of skills together and make them easily accessible for people. So we're just starting retreats and talks and things like that. I also work as a mental health first aider trainer, so I kind of train the trainers who do the training. So yeah, there's always plenty to do, and I support Andy in his business. I'm a director of his business as well. He's quite busy at the moment, and there's the kids and the dogs and the cats and the my friends. I would say that as a person, I don't know many people who are as loved as I am. I don't know if it's a reaction to not being loved as a child. I'm a good friend. I'm good to the people who love me. It's important to me. Really, really important to me.
Brilliant. Well, we look forward to seeing what comes next, whether that might be, whether that's the play or the book or the doctorate or something you haven't thought of.
Hoping I can get those to market. That's kind of where my focus is right now, probably for the next 5 years. It's been a year. It's new in.
It's no time.
It's no time. It's no time. To go from concept to export in a year on my own really isn't bad going.
And all the awards you've won.
Yeah. I know. Cool, eh?
So if anyone is looking for a brilliant Friday night out, but with an equally brilliant Saturday morning when they wake up,
drink for tomorrow.
Have a try some of these. I'm sure you'll enjoy them. Colette, it's been fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, and for my biscuits.
Well, you call them biscuits, but yes, you can take them with you when you return back to. So you're going to Liverpool.
Going to Liverpool tonight, yeah. I'm going to go and see, I believe it's Macbeth, actually, an amazing adaptation of Macbeth that's being done tonight. And I think then I have got a bit of a mummy thing tomorrow, and then later on in the week I'm away again. I've got the House of Happiness Day rave in London on Saturday, which is a goat-sponsored event, and then I don't know what I'm doing after. And I never really know. I never think too far ahead.
Even just listening to that is making me think I need to drink some of that
goat. Yeah.
Just
it does
energy
work.
to keep up with all of these things.
Yeah, it does.
So Colette, thank you. It's been great, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Do join us again for another edition of Northern Spotlights.